Empty rooms long unrented, flickering lights, the quiet hum of a labored generator somewhere deep within the confines of the apartment. The gaudy sky blue wallpaper had yellowed, chipped, and begun to strip away, revealing the slowly rotting carcass of what once was a popular stay, the Kingsmouth Manor, a building long past its prime and home only to rats, cobwebs, and the few tenants that found the manor to be suitable at the very least. The uninviting maw of this place, an old wooden door whose brass fixtures had begun to rust in their years of neglect, swung open, a rarity. Through the doors came a plain-looking woman, dressed in simple business attire. She made her way inside and closed the door behind her before making her way through the main foyer. She was a clerk at a local auction house, the only one in the town of Kingsmouth. She made her way past the empty concierge's desk, a simple wooden counter decorated with a lone off-silver bell on its surface. She pressed her finger upon the small nub of metal, as she did every day when she passed. No ring sounded out, only the dull clack of it hitting the plastic base plate of its housing. The sound of quiet footsteps led her down an empty corridor and up a flight of stairs to the second floor, room 286. The door opened, revealing a decrepit little space barely fit to be called a home. It was lifeless. No lights, no color, only the dim of muted moonlight shining through old, threadbare curtains. Small memories of a fragmented past hung from the walls, dusty picture frames whose glass faces had accumulated dust. The woman's eyes moved towards them curiously. The pictures themselves stirred something within her as she closed the door, stepping further into the room to reach out to closer inspect one of the pictures. As she touched the picture, she felt a spike of cold rush up from her pointer finger. The woman ignored the sensation that quickly subsided and took down the picture frame, holding it in her hands. She tried to rub the dust from it to no avail. Only the shadowed silhouettes of some 3 humanoid figures stood watch in silent sentry eternal behind the murky glass. She placed it back onto the lone nail from which it hung. She didn't remember putting the pictures up, and as she surveyed the space around her, she found discontent bubbling up from inside of her, but shook her head with a sharp breath. She noticed her breath in the air. It was cold, yet it didn't feel as such. A drawer opens, and a bottle follows suit with haste. The alcoholic beverage in hand as she slumps onto the lone couch, tossing a cushion off to the side. The dim of the room seemed so much darker now as she grabbed the remote and turned on the television. A discontented grunt escaped her as she flipped through the channels. Nothing but the hiss of interference and the monochrome of static flashing across the screen. She stared at the screen idly, taking a sip from the bottle. It had lost its flavor. The woman undid the first button of her shirt with a sigh, settling the bottle down on the coffee table at her side. The sudden creak of the wooden floorboards behind her sent a jolt through her body. She couldn't move. The feeling of what she thought was a hand on her shoulder, cold and heavy. She turned after her temporary paralysis had subsided, seeing nothing. How many hours she sat there, contemplating things. The woman's leg bounced up and down nervously as she closed her eyes. She pictured the room she was in, stretching and contorting into an endless hallway. She tried to think of something else, of work, of the taste she couldn't find on her tongue, or the sensation of the cold she couldn't feel. Her legs shook more fervently as she downed another swig, looking at the translucent brown bottle with scrutiny. She gasped. Black ichor filled the bottle and overflowed, rising from the bottom, running over her hand, viscous and frigid. She closed her eyes and opened them again. The bottle lay on the carpet. The beer had stained it, but there was no sign of the peculiar black liquid. She turned her gaze to her hand, seemingly unbothered by the vision, for the time being. The sound of rain grew more apparent to her. Had it been raining this entire time? She looked to the window and saw it was open, the drizzle soaking several stacks of paper piled high along the far wall. Old documents, unfinished drawings, old memories, now forgotten. She cursed under her breath and stood up, walking to the window to close it. She squinted, staring out at water, rolling waves crashing against an unfamiliar shore. Turning the locking bolt and looking out again, she saw the lights of the town. She was still in Kingsmouth, an unremarkable suburbia miles from the ocean. Her attention turned to the stacks of papers. More of the same. Old newspaper clippings now waterlogged, their texts blurred and illegible. She began looking through the papers now, wondering when the last time she'd cleaned was. It didn't matter. She felt a sudden urgency in finding something meaningful amidst the piles. A journal bound in leather. She flipped through the pages, finding only blurred photographs taped to the inside. Growling in frustration, she rubbed her eyes and fumbled for the light switch on the nearby wall, her hand eventually finding its mark and flicking it on. The room grew darker now. The walls felt as if they were shrinking, closing around her. She heard the ever-present buzz of the electric current in the lone light bulb in the living room. The shadows cast from the television seemed to sway across the ground. No, pulsed. Her breath became labored and she dropped the journal, shaking her head. Fatigue must have taken her, she thought, as she walked hurriedly to the bathroom. Her heart quickened as the shadows followed. Her confusion and disorientation led to anger as she fumbled with the buttons on her shirt, the thin leather belt around her waist, the skirt. She struggled, wrestling the offending articles free of her. As she removed them, she began to feel lighter, closing her eyes as she drew in a deep breath. Opening them, she looked down at herself. Leathery gray skin, translucent flesh replaced her. She turned to the mirror just to see herself again. A palm, her palm, cupping one of her cheeks as she observed herself. Brown eyes, black hair. Were they always that color? She couldn't remember. She didn't care. Mutterings and whispers clouded the mind. The woman kicked aside the clothing and stepped into the shower, turning the clear plastic knobs, ushering the old copper veins to open, stuttering to life as she was doused in water. She felt the cold. She felt something, and she took solace in that feeling, resting her arms against the wall as she felt the frigid water running over her head and down her body, as she breathed in and out, slower now. Her heartbeat followed suit as she closed her eyes and dreamt. Weightless, surrounded by nothing, suspended in the nothingness. Terror and calm flooding the body, eyes open in the blackness as she descended deeper into the abyss, deeper and deeper. Deeper into indifference as 1,000 eyes appeared from the depths. She awoke, her hands clutching desperately at the knobs of the faucet in a white-knuckled grip. The woman's pale skin was red from the scalding heat of the water, yet she felt no discomfort. Closely inspecting her hand through the steam that rose from the shower floor, she turned the knobs on the faucets, choking out the flow of water, before making her way to her bedroom. The window was open again. the rain coming down in sheets now. It didn't matter. She lay down on her back, looking up at the ceiling for what seemed like an eternity. Shapes forming from the bumps and ridges of the bumpy ceiling. She eventually fell to sleep, more dreamless, formless dreams of nothing, as she felt the cold air over her wet skin. The sound of the rain and thunder growing louder, thronging in her ears. The whispers followed, an unintelligible cacophony, visions of the deep. The window cracked, and she opened her eyes, startling awake. Surrounded in nothingness, she looked up towards shimmering rays of light making their way through dark water. She saw herself standing at the precipice to the abyss, teetering on the edge of a floorless room. Her bedroom. The figure stared at her unblinkingly as it drifted farther away, the light fading, dimming with each passing moment. She turned herself now, her arms and legs treading through the pitch to gaze at what could have been downwards, as the last vestiges of light disappeared completely, plunging her into the gaze of 1,000 formless figures, staring unblinkingly from the deep.